This is our shading practice exercise. So you're going to need to get some drawing pencils, just an assortment, a light like an 82H, HB, middle of the road, and then a darker one, so probably a 4B or a 6B, an eraser, sharpener, and then a tissue or a blending stump. I know some art teachers really don't like you to use those. I'm kind of in the middle. I'll show you how I use it. So the first thing we're going to do is shade the corners of this box in reverse. So going light to dark from one side and then dark to light on the other. And I really want you to practice smooth transitions and filling the rectangle, not using super scribbly lines, because that's going to make your drawing look incomplete or like you rushed. So I'm going to go from that bottom corner. I'm starting with my 6B pencil. And if you shade with the tip of your pencil, it makes a harsher line, whereas if you shade with the side of your pencil, it makes a blurrier, smoother line. So I'm using the tip of the pencil right here because I'm trying to make a really crisp edge. When I try to blend it, I use more of the side of the pencil. And a 6B is a lot smoother than a 2H or anything that's a harder graphite pencil. So you can see I switched to using the side of my pencil now. And then it's a lot about pressure. You want to have light pressure as you're going to fade it out to lighter. And this just takes practice, so knowing how much pressure to put, and you can always go back in with an eraser. So then I'm going to switch. So it's kind of up to you and what you like. Sometimes I'll start with the HB instead. But you really want to practice using different types of pressure and not pressing super hard all the time. I know that's kind of our first instinct when we're drawing, when we don't know any better, is to just press really hard with the tip of the pencil. So I'm just going to, and again I'm using the side, overlap, overlap. And sometimes I shade with little strokes and overlap them. Sometimes I'll do little circles. Again, this is kind of what your style is. So you have to kind of decide. You just don't want it to be scribbly and look like you're rushing through. You want to try to make a solid value as much as you can, because the paper is going to have texture. The pencil is going to be different. But this should take some time. All right, I'm going to speed it up a little bit. All right, another important thing, make sure there's no bumps on your table. You know, I also teach sculpture, so sometimes there's hot glue and things, so you can see how it's making that little line right there. And then I try to erase it out and I smudge it, and the spot's just still there. Also, don't put your fingers on your paper because there's natural oils in your fingertips that will also leave like a grease spot in your work. So you can see I'm just shading away. And that little mark is still there, which makes me think it is some kind of glue or something, because it does leave a mark on my paper. So you want to be really careful about where you set your paper. because you can see it shows up on my drawing, and that's really annoying. So if this was gonna final drawing or something like that, I would probably start over. So you can see I shaded the other corner from dark to light, so you get this really nice optical illusion effect. And then just make sure your values are just faded as much as possible. And then you can use your eraser to kind of go back in and take things up. And then I'm using a tissue. Now with the tissue, it's not a drawing utensil. Just use it sparingly, and then never just use the tissue to smear it, to smudge it, and then stop. You always need to go back over it with a pencil, or it's just going to look like mashed potatoes. So if I see you doing that, I am going to tell you to go over it with the pencil again, because you don't want to lose that pencil texture. All right, our next is dark to light. So similar. This is in conjunction with, we're going to do a sphere next and a cylinder. So just practicing shading like that. So again, I'm starting with my 6B, and then you're just fading it out from each side. So you're almost making like a little value scale that fades to the center. Then just touching up the corners. And it's kind of hard to do this in like such a little rectangle and pull out a lot of values and not have it immediately go from light to dark. Sorry about the bouncing. I probably should check the table. And then I'm going back with an eraser. Actually, a kneaded eraser would probably work better for this. This is just what I had around. But you can use a gum eraser like this to carve out highlights, which is something I like to do a lot, is using the eraser as a drawing tool. So again, you saw that little tissue. You can use a blending stump as well. I just don't have any. And if I use a tissue or a blending stump, it's just to kind of smooth things out, but it can get really challenging because you can use that blending stump or tissue, and then all of a sudden everything's going to be a muddy gray because you just smushed all your values together. So again, if you use a tissue or a blending stump, make sure you're using it sparingly and that you are going back over it with a pencil just to give that pencil texture back. So you can see I like made it into a little point, and I'm just using some little circles just to slowly smudge it. So that kind of helps if you're still seeing a lot of the white paper, but I'm like barely grazing the paper. And then I'll kind of go back over it to clean up the center. So just use it sparingly. Don't use it as a drawing tool. You're using it as an enhancer. Ideally, you don't want to rely on it. And like I said, some art teachers won't even let you use it. So with the ribbon, you just want to shade dark to light to dark, just back and forth. It doesn't really matter how you do it. I kind of fudged when I was drawing the middle ribbon, so sorry guys, I didn't want to make a bunch more copies. But it's just practicing going dark to light to dark to light to dark to light as if there's a highlight. So very similar to the last two, but just a different shape, and now we're starting to make it look like something is coming in and out at us, trying to give a line form. Alright, this last one is crisscross, so it is pretty much the same as the top left, except instead of corner to corner, you're going to make lines that crisscross, and you're going to go from the center dark to light. You could also reverse it. But again, just practicing having crisp edges and then smooth edges. So having a variety of edges when you're drawing and shading and adding value, this is what's going to create believable form. So having nice crisp transition edges and then having nice smooth blended values from light to dark. So that's why we're doing this. And this would also probably help. You could use a ruler if you want to make it super crisp. If you also notice, I got a different 6B pencil because the one that I got prior to this one wasn't really smooth enough. It was kind of weird. So I'm going to go from dark to light on these two corners, and then the opposite ones I'm going to go from light to dark. All right, the last thing we need to do is the impossible shape. So the impossible shape are very crisp edges, so like no transitions. And I know it's kind of hard to see on my copy, but there's one side that's dark, one side that's middle, and then one side that is lighter. So you're going to have a dark, a mid, and a light. And then all you're going to do is shade those different parts with that value. And then if you do that, it creates this really cool optical illusion. And I was just going to show you another way to get a really sharp edge is just get a little piece of masking tape. If you put it on your sweater or jeans first and then put it on the paper, it will definitely not peel up your paper when you're done with it. But this is another way to get kind of a cheat to get a really clean edge. So I'm going to shade that outside part the darkest value I can get, and then the other part I labeled a mid-tone, and then the last part of it, the light highlight value. All right, now I'm just finishing up, and you can see that looks pretty cool. So again, I'm using the side of the pencil. I'm trying to cover all of the paper so that it doesn't look very scribbly. And then here we go. Now with the tissue, again, I'm making it into a point, and I'm barely grazing the paper. And I'm doing like little circles. And then I'm also trying to not overlap and get that tissue on both values, because then it's gonna smear them together. And I absolutely don't want that. I want crisp edges. So that's another way the tissue or the blending stump can trip you up. And then always go back over it with the pencil so it has that pencil texture. Don't ever just leave it after using the tissue. And then cleaning up that line. And just with 3 simple values, we have a really interesting looking form. All right, so when you're finished, just make sure you show me your work. An excellent job.